Now, after hearing somebody who is pretty sceptical, shall we say, about the merits of HS2, we can listen to someone with a different take to Lord Berkeley, and that's the director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, Henri Murison, who joins us now from Ilkley in Yorkshire. Thank you very much for being on the programme. Starting off with HS2.
Morning, Sophie.
What do you make of Lord Berkeley's concerns about this high-speed rail link?
I mean, I sat and talked to Lord Berkeley along with a number of the other panel members when they first started their review. And what always concerns me when I listen to somebody talking on your programme saying things that they've said before is that obviously he was supposed to take part in an independent process to look at the project, and he seems to have pretty much exactly the same views as when I first met him. So, I mean, this sounds like the views of someone who's always been a sceptic of HS2 simply making the same points they've made before. And although I actually do agree with Tony about the importance of those connections across the north, those commuter connections, for instance, between cities like Leeds and Manchester, as Boris Johnson has promised to improve with a new line, I don't accept the premise of his argument that it's a choice between those improvements and better connectivity to cities like, for instance, Birmingham to Leeds or from, say, Sheffield to London, which is actually quite a tortuous journey, to be honest. Currently, it's not the easiest part of the rail network to traverse. So what I would say in response to some of Tony's claims, I think his numbers on the BCR, he accused the government and others of misleading Parliament, which I think is wrong, but he also gets the numbers wrong. So in our evidence, which we submitted to the Oakervie process from an independent panel of northern experts and leaders who did all agree on their final report, unlike Tony with the Oakervie review, we submitted figures that actually show that the BCR, that's the cost-benefit number, significantly underestimates the benefits, for instance, of HS2 alongside rebalance the economy through wider Northern Powerhouse investments. And this is also in only a week since we saw leaks that the government's going to revise the Green Book anyway, because it doesn't advantage the North and the Midlands priorities enough. And so you've got Tony on your programme arguing that the Green Book and the DfT's appraisal process is too generous to HS2, when actually all of government policy says that the benefits of major projects like that of HS2 or Northern Powerhouse Rail to the north have been systematically undervalued. So I think Tony's making the same arguments he's always made, and he doesn't seem to have listened to any of the evidence that we and others have presented him with.
At the same time, though, we're talking about an exorbitant amount of money here, and the costs have spiralled, even if there is a debate about exactly how much HS2 is going to cost. And I guess what Lord Berkeley would argue is he's not saying that, you know, in an ideal world it'd be great to have a high-speed rail link plus connections to cities and towns in the north of England, but he's saying, is this the best way to spend £8 billion?
So, I mean, we would argue that it is, and the reality for that is that there is no other way to underpin rebalancing the British economy. So you do need connections, for instance, from cities like Birmingham to Leeds, and more capacity to get down to London if you're going to continue to rebalance the economy. And what the damage is that there isn't an alternative that adds up. So he's talked in great detail on your programme about these conventional upgrades. Well, there is no plan for that stacks up. And actually, when you do try and upgrade the West Coast Main Line, it still costs billions and billions. We've tried to do it before a decade ago. We had to shut it every weekend for years. And I think many Northerners who experienced the upgrade to the West Coast Main Line, for what were significant benefits, would be really quite upset if we spent a similar amount of money to get what would then be a smaller amount of benefits. When actually, if you built a purpose-built new line, you would also unlock the West Coast Main Line for freight and commuter services, because the particular irony of what Lord Berkeley is saying on your programme today is actually around cities like Sheffield and Manchester, HS2 unlocks critical commuter infrastructure, for instance, to get to places like Stockport, a big commuter town for Manchester, to get from Chesterfield, which is really nearby to Sheffield, but very congested bit of rail line from Chesterfield to Sheffield. Actually, local commuters are some of the biggest beneficiaries from HS2. And so if you want to improve the lives for northern commuters, then you do need more capacity on the rail network. Actually, HS2, by unlocking the existing capacity, makes a huge contribution to that. And again, it's disingenuous for Tony not to accept that in his remarks this morning.
We're running out of time. There's a couple of other things that I'm keen to talk about a bit more widely. You, of course, have been banging the drum for more investment in the north of England for some years now, but it feels that after the election there has been almost a renewed focus on the north of England and also the Midlands after those kind of dramatic results we saw in those areas. I wonder if part of you thinks that you've heard this all before, or do you really believe Boris Johnson when he says that he wants to prioritise investment in those northern communities?
I think that the Prime Minister's commitment is genuine. I think there are those around the Cabinet table like Jake Berry and Rishi Sunak who genuinely believe in, for instance, projects like Northern Powerhouse Rail, but also wider initiatives, for instance, to rebalance spending in research and development. And you've got those like the Science Minister, for instance, who aren't around the Cabinet table but are very much kind of real supporters of this. I think the point is that people need to get behind those like the Science Minister or Rishi Sunak at the Treasury to help them to deliver these commitments in time for the budget. I know that there's been lots of people who've said that the commitment to this from the government might not be genuine. I'm prepared to give the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt, but he is going to have to make sure he really does deliver, because the promise was made 5 years ago by George Osborne in that Northern Powerhouse speech that would rebalance the British economy. That would have huge benefits, an additional $1 trillion of economic value by 2050. But this government, after Theresa May's lacklustre approach, has really got to grasp the nettle, because otherwise those commitments that help them win the Blue Wall seats might lead to them losing them.
Talking about that, just briefly, in the Sunday Times this morning, a civil servant who used to run the Northern Powerhouse project, Nicola Headland, said, "Our ideas were allowed to wither and die. We kept knocking on the door, but nobody was listening, including number 10. The machinery of Whitehall doesn't work for the regions." Is that true?
I think we do need to have a different institutional settlement, and I think we need to take the powers and responsibilities out of Whitehall. I'd go even further than Nicola does in that piece in her comments to the Sunday Times, and I would say that what we actually need to do is take spending decisions around infrastructure and transport out of London completely and bring them back to our northern leaders like Ben Houchen, the Mayor of the Tees Valley, Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham, the mayors in the North West on the Labour side. Government needs to trust those mayors, create more elected mayors, but also give more powers to Transport for the North at that pan-northern level, because the people I do trust to make those decisions and get stuff done are our mayors and our civic leaders working across the North. As long as we rely on the generosity of a particular civil servant or having the right people around the Cabinet table, that's not good enough for the North of England. We need to take power permanently from Whitehall, and I think that's the only way we're ever going to get real progress.